We're about to segue to a panel on the higher education system, and I have the distinct honor of introducing the moderator of the panel, Monique Hosein. Monique is the coordinator of public programs at the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley, and one of the many partners of the California Labor Lab Collaborative. She's a graduate of the Doctor of Public Health program at UC Berkeley School of Health and the Master of Public Health program, Community Health Education at San Francisco State. Monique brings extensive experience in program management, health education, and cross-sector collaboration in the areas of HIV/AIDS, youth development, and sexual and reproductive health. And we're very glad that she's part of the California Labor Lab. And Monique, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Carlos, for those fantastic remarks. I really appreciated getting a deeper look at the budget machinations, the impacts on workers throughout the academy, not just faculty, what it means for day-to-day life, commuting, multiple jobs, housing, how some of these issues affect workers broadly. So thank you so much for that. And I would like to introduce our panelists, and I'm also going to let you know that one of our panelists can't make it today, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about why, because I think it's worth mentioning. So first of all, if I may, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Catherine Hutchinson. She is the president of the CSU Employees Union and the CSU EU statewide president and biology technician at CSU Channel Islands, and has emerged as a catalyst for change in 2011 when she and her fellow ISTs faced layoffs. This pivotal moment sparked her involvement in the union, leading her to become chapter president in 2013. Catherine's financial acumen saw her transition to VP for Finance in 2017, setting the stage for her election as statewide president in June 2020. With a BS from CSUSB and master's from CSUCI and completing her MS in legal studies from Pepperdine Law School, Catherine embodies a harmonious blend of science, advocacy, and leadership. That's powerful. Her journey is a testament to resilience and a commitment to positive change. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And Jim, I'm going to ask you to, ahead of time, tell me how to pronounce your last name correctly.
Oh, thank you. Philliou.
Philliou, thank you for that. We've just met today and it's a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Jim Philliou, Executive Director of the Cal State University Employees Union. Jim Philliou is Executive Director at CSUEU and has been organizing workers with SEIU and First Unite here for 30 plus years. He led SEIU's first home care California home care campaign in San Mateo County in 1994 and served as SEIU's Western Region Organizing Director and National Organizing Director. He returned to California in 2010 and served as consultant to unions on organizing and bargaining prior to working as CSUEU Executive Director. Thank you so much for being here. And as I mentioned, one of our panelists, Rafael Jaime, a PhD candidate and a teaching fellow at UCLA, is not able to join us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and why he's not here. I'm not in a position to speak for him, but I think it adds some context to our gathering. So Rafael is a PhD candidate and teaching fellow in the English department at UCLA and co-president of UAW 4811, the union representing 48,000 academic workers at the University of California. And full disclosure, he and I are union siblings. I was part of the 2022 strike. And the reason he's not able to join us today is that the union has filed unfair labor practice charges, and there's a strike authorization vote happening next week from Monday, May 13th to Wednesday, May 15th. And this is in response to UC's actions against peaceful protesters at UCLA. So and there are demands related to that, but this has been treated in the context of responding to workers. So they're not just students, they're also workers, and that is what is happening, and that has what has kept Raphael awake today. Thank you again. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with a few questions. I'm going to ask each of you to go around. Tell us a little bit about yourself beyond what we heard, including what drew you to this work, and a little bit about how you see the landscape of work in higher education changing. And you know what, I'm just going to start with Catherine, if I may.
Sure. So I started out my career, just more background, as a student assistant in financial aid at Cal State San Bernardino. So I've been in higher education my whole career. I haven't worked outside of higher education. So for me, it's been a lifelong passion to see and make sure that the workers and the students and the faculty, are doing the mission of the CSU, which is to develop working students for a successful career. And so I started out there as a student, but my passion is biology. And so I ended up being trained in the labs and took my first job as a lab technician in biology at Cal State San Bernardino. And then Channel Islands, which is the last campus to open up, and it's in Camarillo. And I say that because I still have people asking me if we're on the Channel Islands, and we're not. We're in Camarillo. And they opened up in 2002. In 2003, I applied for the biolab technician job there, and came over, and I've been here ever since for it'll be 21 years in July. So, but from that, seeing how the students, because I was a student assistant myself, and transitioning to staff and working with faculty because I work in academic affairs, I've seen everything of how staff, faculty, and students have been treated by the system, and wanted to get involved to make it better. So for all of us.
Thank you for that. And Mazel Tov on 21 years, a distinguished career. Jim, I'm going to turn things over to you to ask about how you got into this, what drove you to this work, and what are your thoughts about working in higher education? What are some,
way back when I get into it, because I was working in the restaurant industry, and what's now Unite here hired me and put me in a training program. And I was just shocked that you could get paid to do organizing and to do this work. I was like, geez, I'd be doing this for free if somebody, I didn't even think about getting paid. So I had no idea there was a profession where you could represent people. So they got me started way back when. But then fast forward to the last couple of years, when I first met Catherine and the CSUU leaders, my first question was like, why are you guys kind of a secret operation? Like, you represent this big institution, but people outside don't know much about you. And it seemed like as we started studying what was going on the campuses, we have 4 bargaining units across the whole system. But what Dr. Carlos was pointing out prior, there's all these separate categories of workers. So when Catherine and I started talking, I was like, what are these people talking about? Stateside or auxiliary? Who are these different? She said, well, we represent the stateside people, and then there's auxiliaries, and then there's student assistants. And then she said, well, how come the student assistants can't be in the union? I said, I think they can be in the union. We have to just organize them. And so, we had started looking at the student assistants, but as we looked at our own bargaining units, we realized that even though we represent technical, administrative, custodial, health services, when you look at the work on the campuses in those categories, we probably represent less than half of the people doing the work when you count student assistants and you count the auxiliaries. So I think the biggest challenge in higher ed is really that the unions work together to dig through these what are sort of shell games that the employer plays to say, you don't work for the university, you work for Dr. Carlos's auxiliary, or you're the student assistant working for Catherine, you're not in the bargaining unit. So I think it's our job as advocates and leaders to look at those situations and figure out how do we punch through that stuff to make sure that everybody on the campus who's doing the kind of work that we're doing in our CSUEU group has a chance to be in the union and have a decent life. And so that's where the student assistant campaign started. And we're not done yet. So we have a lot more work to do to represent everybody, in the CSU ecosystem. And, we support the other folks doing that at UC as well.
Thank you. I guess one of the ways is you bring the charts and graphs like Dr. Carlos. So Dr. Carlos, turning it over to you. Tell us how a nice man like you ended up in all this budget things and
So, I mean,
and work.
I grew up working poor. So like, working class issues have always been a sort of part of my life. My dad was a UFCW 770. So, I went to college, trying to achieve the American dream. You realize like, oh, like the American dream is really about exploiting workers. And so, I've been at sort of labor community organizing for a really long time. Got trained by SEIU as an undergrad to do living wage coalition work. And so it's every step I've ever been at, I've always been, can I join a union? Can I be involved? How can I be useful? And now I get to teach about it and also sort of participate in it. But for me, the struggle is really in addition to all these like technical struggles, like there's all these things like maneuvering that unions are doing, is that we're really fighting, like what are the priorities of the institution? And this is sort of a bigger connection to, I had a conversation the other day with the president. He approached me and we were talking about budgets. And he's like, there's no money. You keep saying there's $10 billion, trying to give me a math lesson. And then it turned to like, even the presidents, we don't make enough money. If I was a CEO, at a private corporation, I'd be making more. And I was like, hold up. I'm going to stop you right there because one, you're not at a private corporation, you're at a public institution and we're public servants. And so if you want to go to the private sector, you're more than welcome to. You can get way more money. But so we're fighting this like ideological struggle over the like priorities of public institutions and public service, like, the public good. And so we're like, one of the things that I really love about this work and working with, Catherine and everyone else, and I get to run into them more often because of all this activity now, is that we're fighting these struggles. But at the end of the day, we're also fighting the struggle over, what is in the public good and the public interest. And we're trying to reclaim that. And we're digging our heels into, budgets as moral documents, budgets as documents that show, what your actual priorities are. And so for me, that's really the struggle, is we're trying to wrestle it back from people who run these institutions on a corporate, like, oh, these are business models. Like, no, we're here to provide services, and we're here to provide, public benefit to our California residents in our context. And so I think that's what the struggle really is over, is wrestling back that, business model sort of narrative away from them and turning it to public benefit and good.
Thank you. We have a comment in the chat that just points out how bloated private sector executive salaries are. We've got a response in the chat. We have some questions that we'll get to. Before that, I'm going to go around again, and I will come back around with asking about solutions. But what I'm going to ask is, how has work in higher education changed for better or worse? And what do you think are the most important challenges workers are facing? And Jim, I'm going to go to you if that's all right.
No problem. I was ready to punt to my colleagues here because they've been working more on the campus than I have. So, again, I think that the challenges are just that the cost of life is just so high. So, we talk about what the student tuition is, and they're like shrugging their shoulders at tuition, just saying that's not our biggest cost. And so, with the student workers, we're going to negotiate raises for them. They are not covered by state sick leave, so when they miss a day, they lose the whole pay. When there's a holiday and we're all celebrating, they're losing pay. So we're trying to bring them up sort of out of the gutter here into the road so that they can have some basic conditions. But even then, we're not going to be able to address, their housing situations. I think we feel like it's our job to build a base on the campuses to make sure that the campus, like Dr. Carlos says, they put their priorities in the right place and don't make it worse for the student workers or for the career staff. But then we're still going to have to work in coalition, with other unions and beyond labor on issues like how to build more housing around the campuses that people can actually live in, without having to win a lottery. So I think that's just the costs that are out of our control are a big problem, because we can't effectively at this point negotiate over that stuff. And we think we need to build a broader coalition to do that kind of work.
Thank you. Catherine.
So for someone who's been in the CSU system for so long, our challenges, especially from the staff perspective, is it's been around the wages. And it was something that we fought over because we used to be on a step system in the CSU system. And over 30 years ago, they took it away and implemented a system that would allow for staff to apply for a raise any time of the year. And what it turned into was a way for management and the employer to compress us and keep us down. So the bad thing was when you get hired, you see the salary range and you're like, oh my gosh, I can make the top of that range. Yes, life is good. But then you get into the system and you're like, wait a minute, the range keeps moving because every time the union negotiated a raise for us, they said they had to move the range. So you were always stuck at the bottom and never reaching that top. And we just told them, this doesn't work. We need a step system back. And we have been very good advocates with our legislature in the CSU system of having them help us because they are responsible for the CSU. They're at the end of the day, the employer of the CSU. They pay for everything. And so we went to them about it and the governor agreed and paid for a study by a company called Mercer to show that we were underpaid. And sure enough, the study did. We were 12% below market and compared to UC system and the community colleges. And that helped us push to get a step system back in place, which we negotiated last year for our people to show. So that was one of our biggest challenges, was trying to lift our workers up to at least get paid to have a livable wage. You know, people work 2-3 jobs and that's not right. And you know, with California inflation and everything going up, it's just very hard to maintain. And so that's that was our challenge. And we've been having some wins with our staff. You know, we negotiated one of our highest percentages because it showed 12% behind. So 7% in one contract year, 5% last year. And then our next challenge is the budget shortfall of California. So we're in the legislature now trying to fight to keep in, because the governor has promised this 5% budget compact to the UC and the CSUs. And he's asking them to dip into the reserves that Dr. Carlos showed earlier that the CSU has, pay us out of that, and then he'll pay them back next year. And my concern is, I don't know what the California budget's going to look like next year. Are we going to rebound? I mean, if you listen to people, we're back to almost the 2007, 8, 9 era of bad budget. So our fear is that he won't be able to pay it back. And then we're fighting, you know, over how to get that money again. So we're trying to keep it in the budget of this year. So a lot of challenges just around budgets and something we are asking the system and trying to push for is other funding. For our CSU, they should not just be relying on the state of California to fund the system. If they want to have the president have all these raises, if they want to fix the buildings, it shouldn't be on the backs of the faculty and staff and students. You know, raising tuition, not giving out raises. It should be that, what's another funding source that we can have that'll come in and help take care of the system and develop the people that we need to continue for California to be a great state to live in. So those are some of the things that we've been working on.
Thank you. Dr. Carlos, I'm going to turn to you. I was saving these questions for question time, but one of these ties into some of Catherine's remarks. And in case you can address it, I will ask you now. It is, can we publicize the current budgets and what the budget should look like if teaching and learning were the focus? If you can fit that into your remarks, that's fine. If not, you can save them for later. But going back to the question of how working conditions have changed for better or worse over the years, and what are the most important challenges workers are facing?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, again, it's both a budget question, but also a budget part. Like I want to separate budget with budget priority, because, you know, like, so, you know, Catherine mentioned, you know, like maybe if he doesn't pay us back, even if they don't pay us back, the money's already there. I mean, historically, you know, I think we need to also have a conversation about, you know, like how like race and the changing racial dynamics and demographics of California have changed. You know, the CFA put out a report, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, that said, you know, as universities got browner, you know, the state funding, you know, started dipping, right? And I think there's you know, I think there's a conversation that needs to be had there in terms of, you know, funding. You know, what are we competing with when we're talking about the governor's budget? We're competing with prisons, we're competing with police departments, right? And so
Mhm.
people say, you know, oh, we don't have the money, but you know, when it comes to, you know, policing, you know, UCLA or any of, you know, current ongoing encampments, like that money's always there. And there's nobody asking questions about we don't have the money. And so, you know, it ends up, you know, whether it comes directly from the CSU or UC or like LAPD or whatever, it ends up, you know, costing taxpayers. And so I think part of us making this sort of question is really promoting a vision of, you know, like, let's actually put forth, and I think that's a great idea, is for us to start having conversations across our unions and across you know, stakeholders. You know, what does a California budget look like, you know, that actually, you know, funds the things that might make life livable. And what they've all said, I agree with, in the context of, you know, sometimes one of the problems is, you know, okay, you raise our salaries, great, but you know, landlords now know that we have more money, and so they raise the rents. And so, like, you know, even at the state level, you know, or city levels, raising minimum wage is fantastic, but then it also comes with like the not the purposeful, not automatic, but you know, it comes with people know, oh, there's more money we can dive into. So that part of this also gets into a whole other conversation about what the CSU and UC system can do to not just benefit staff and faculty, but also the communities they live in terms of driving prices down. So like, if they want to have auxiliaries, they can have auxiliaries that actually just serve the public good in the context of maybe being a community land trust where, you know, you build housing that's at affordable below market rates. It doesn't have to make a profit off of them, as long as the bills are getting paid. And so, you know, in terms of that conversation, I think we need to start reimagining what that looks like. And we don't have to work hard because we've already done it. The CSU and UC system used to do it before. We used to be institutions that, you know, were good jobs for all of its employees. And I think, you know, we can replicate that. But it just takes different budget priority from both Sacramento and also our leadership. You know, the board of trustees, you know, the governor appoints them. You know, we need to be appointing people to the UC regents and the CSU trustees who actually, you know, are interested in the public interest and they care about the students rather than the bond rating. And to answer the quick question quickly, on the Q&A, the only thing good is that, you know, we have new buildings that, you know, that still also have maintenance issues. That they can put on the fancy, you know, recruitment magazines or the recruitment, you know, promotional materials. That's the only thing I've seen that we have that it's improved.
Okay, so you're responding to the question
Yeah.
about has any good come out of CSU's good bond rating? In other words, has CSU borrowed money at a low rate and done something worthy with it? And I think so they could credibly argue that investments and reserves are paying off and not merely hoarding. And you're saying some buildings and maybe not in the best shape. Okay, and I just want to appreciate your distinction between budget and budget priorities. And you know, shout out to Dr. King about a budget as a moral document. And also, you have led us into our next conversation, which is starting to talk about what changes are needed, what needs to be done to improve working conditions, what actions or strategies might you recommend to achieve the changes needed? And Catherine, can I go to you for this first?
Sure. So the changes for at least the staff and the students and the CSU is we actually, you know, it's funny they taught this word transparency and communication, and one of our biggest issues right now we're running into is lack of communication and involvement. They don't include us as stakeholders, especially the staff. We have to fight to get on committees to be heard, and we're the ones seeing the challenges and problems in the CSU. We have a huge Title IX issue in the CSU. There's 12 bills out there that right now from the legislature because of it. And it's all because the administration has decided that they know what's best and they know how to run the institution without any input from the stakeholders, which is the faculty, staff, and students. And so it's been challenging trying to change things at the system when you don't have people at the top listening or want to hear from you. And so we've been trying to work with the employer, be more involved in saying, like, if you include us from the beginning, we can avoid a lot of these problems. We're not here to shut the university down. We're not here to even make $1 million as staff and faculty. But we want to be a part of the solution, and they're making us part of the, I feel a lot of times, especially a challenge with the CSU, when I've gone to legislature over stuff, they put us out there, the faculty and staff, and then they come behind and say, oh yes, we support it, we push this, and we end up doing all the work. And I'm like, how is that being joint partners if the faculty and staff are going to end up doing all the heavy lift, and then you're not there until the last minute, and the legislature doesn't see that until the very end? So it's been this challenge with the employer and with the CSU system to include us all. So it has to change. They have to start working with us. The unions, we all started working together because we realized that we were separated and divided, and they were able to pit things against us. And now we all communicate with each other. We try and do our coalitions together, even at the campus level, including the statewide level. We're trying to keep each union informed, and that's what we need to start to see happening at the CSU. We all just want a better place to work and live, and we could do it together if they just, you know, treated us as true, valued, equal stakeholders versus you're the lowly people that just need to shut up and do the work. So,
Yeah. Thank you for that. Jim.
I would say we need to work on the state level. Catherine referenced that the state does need more revenue if we're going to have a flourishing state. CSU doesn't necessarily need more revenue. They need both some accountability and some consistent revenue. So the challenge for, I think, for labor people working with the CSU is you want to go to the state level and talk about ideas for generating revenue that can be used for things like CSU. Then when you work at CSU, you want to make sure that the money that comes in, you know, is used for the proper purpose. And then there is a lot of waste that goes on there, and a lot of things that we agree are off mission. You know, I think the biggest thing we can push for CSU is they have to commit that everybody working on the campus should have a decent standard in terms of their contract and their standard, whether they're a lecturer, whether they're a student assistant, whether they work for an auxiliary. And that's going to be, you know, our mission at CSUEU is going to make sure everybody that's in the ecosystem, you know, doing our kind of work has a basic standard. And first, we have a first contract with the student assistants, and we'll now, you know, branch out to represent some of the auxiliary folks to make sure they get the same thing. So we have kind of our immediate mission, but then we're part of a bigger, you know, bigger strategy, both with the other unions and with the state.
Thank you. Dr. Carlos.
You know, sort of agree with both of them. I think one of the things we need to do is we need to also challenge our leadership. It goes back to the point I'm kind of, you know, reiterating and making over and over is, you know, who their constituency is, right? Is their constituency, you know, the chancellor's office, or like the board of trustees, or like even whoever is managing the $10 billion account? Because I'm sure whoever is managing that is making a lot of money. Or is their constituency the students, faculty, and staff, and the people that work on their campuses, right? Or are they just paper pushers for, you know, the CEO's office, the chancellor's office? And so there needs to be, you know, some accountability there to say, hey, you know, do you work for us, or do you work for some other entity? Because there's a disconnect with what the resources are needed on our campus are, on every campus. And part of that is, and this is why I keep highlighting, like there is money there that they could tap into if they wanted to actually seriously solve some of these problems. Right now, they're talking about enrollment issues. Like they're really scared. They have like these doom and gloom enrollment projections for the CSU. You know, like on our campus, it's actually already real. We went from 15,000 right before the pandemic to around 11,000 right now. And then, but their response to that is to raise tuition. Well, what do you think that's going to do to enrollment? You think, you know, like instead of actually just dipping into the money that you already have, you know, you're going to raise tuition on students, and that's going to make it even harder for students to go to some of these institutions, which technically have historically always been the ones that are more accessible to working class people. And so it's one of those where, you know, working together to challenge people about some of that stuff, and, you know, calling them out when they say, and also having them dip into their auxiliary money. They are, like, this is what I want to highlight, they are bringing in more money than they've ever brought in. There is money. So even if it's not coming from stateside, they're raising it through their auxiliaries. And they always say, well, that's money we can only use for parking. Well, at Cal State Dominguez Hills, they increase parking revenue, but they're not building any new parking structures. We don't have the need for it on our campus because our enrollment's going down. So what's that money being used for? It's not being used for anything, but they'll use it when they need to for their own pet projects, like I mentioned, or, to take a, vacation in Huntington Beach that costs $60,000 for 3 days. But they won't use it for what's actually needed. And so that's where, knowing that information, like on each campus, like, how much money is each campus bringing in? That's why this budget document was really helpful, because all of the things that they're saying, oh, we don't have, you just point, it's right there, it's in the bank account. We found it. You try to hide it, you try to play that game where they shuffle that hat. But like all the hats have ball under them. So we gotta just, hold them accountable for that.
We've brought up some very interesting things. We've heard a lot about accountability, about values, and because Jim, you mentioned, okay, so we have the money. How do we make sure the money is going to where it needs to go? Dr. Carlos, you were talking about there's budget, and there's budget priorities, and a budget as a moral document. And Catherine, you made the very point, which is I'm so proud of the name of this conference by the California Labor Lab: Modern Work and Workers' Voices. Without workers' voices, what are we doing? How do we get strategically? How can we? What mechanisms or policies or legislation or other approaches, actions can help make that shift so that we go back to public education as a valued public good as a point, rather than bloated administrative budgets and so on. Any thoughts on that before we go to our questions? I know I wasn't going to ask an easy question today. I'm sorry. It's what? How do we apply this pressure? Who are the players that can help do this?
Jim, you want to start that one?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that you got a little bit more history here than I do, but I think that what we're both experiencing right now is that when you go through the California budget process and the higher ed budget gets reviewed, CSU has this relationship with the state where they tell the governor and the legislature, just give us our block of money and don't micromanage us. And then they consider it accountability when they sort of put their budget report in these politically correct categories, student basic needs, graduation initiative 2025. Very few people then peel that apart and say, what exactly are you doing? What does graduation initiative really mean? Are you just setting up bank accounts that say graduation initiative? Are you hiring another consultant to tell you what else you should say about graduation initiative? Like what's the actual impact on the ground? Because the benefit of collective bargaining is when we negotiate a contract, we can make sure the money that goes in that category of labor compensation is going to go to those wage increases. So I think the immediate for CSU is we have to be unafraid to challenge those categories. So we'll just tell them, look, we don't, obviously we're for basic needs, but you need to say what you're doing with basic needs, because the people we talk to don't really see it as having much impact. So they've been able to get away with this dance where they say, give us our $6 billion, and then we'll give you a report 3 times a year. And the report comes in these categories. So we have to work together, with CFA, with legislative allies to say, wait, whatever you put in the report is going to be examined very closely, because it's not acceptable to just put these categories out there and then think everyone's going to back off. We're not challenging students when we challenge your basic needs program. We represent the student workers. We're challenging what's underneath that category. So they've been able to build this political armor around themselves, by using sort of politically correct phrases. And then people are, we don't want to challenge that because we'll look like we're opposing the students. Well, no, you're actually supporting the students because they're not getting the benefits of these programs. So that's what I've observed in a couple of years here with CSU. CSU does a good job of putting stuff right in the using the buzzwords that are going to make the legislators move to the next thing. And so our job as advocates is to get underneath that and say, wait a minute, this is not actually, nothing's actually happening on the ground for humans with the money you've budgeted here.
Yeah, thank you for that. So it sounds like there's some pressure in as much as there are nice categories that are you know, so there is some pressure to act like it is a moral document, but it sounds like the next step is folks have to demand the receipts and go, what does this mean and where's it going? Oh, thank you for that. Any other thoughts on
I
making
always
the
have
budget a moral document? Yes,
I always
please,
have lots of thoughts, but I also want to be mindful not to
please.
take over the conversation. So in addition to that, I want to sort of take a step back and put some accountability on us as labor unions, and how do we translate that information to the public? Because when it comes to, like, you know, to the point where we're trying to negotiate a contract, we always need the public support. We need community support. We need people to be on our side. And so we have, you know, limited resources as labor unions, but we do have some resources that we could expend on, you know, like social media and sort of disseminating information that is accessible to young people, to students, because when we get students on our side, it's helpful to their families. And so I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, we were CFA was trying to go on strike. You know, it was going to be the first time in a long time. It's called the Fight for Five, as of 2017. And you know, we pay, you know, we have lobbyists and, you know, doing work, which is really important work in Sacramento, trying to talk to legislatures, trying to get their support. But you know, we didn't have like a really good marketing team. And sort of, you know, society's changing, and sort of one of the things that we have to get better at is how do we take all of this information, reports, whatever it is, and disseminate it to you know, our constituency, which is, you know, California residents, in a way that gets them to put pressure on, you know, like where they're asking the same questions we're asking to their legislatures, because that land's different. Like, obviously, when it comes from us, you know, they know that we're interested in this because it affects us, you know, but when their constituents start asking those same questions that we're asking, it just lands a lot different. And so, you know, that's a challenge to, like, you know, labor unions in general. Like, you know, I still don't know why the AFL-CIO, which is, you know, one of the largest sort of conglomerates of unions in the United States, doesn't have its own TV channel. You know, like, you know, we get all these other channels, you know, teaching us about all kinds of, you know, corporate businesses, you know, the boss, you know, like follow the boss around, or the boss, you know, whatever that TV show is.
Yeah.
All kinds of business. But, like, you know, we have resources that we can put together to you know, to show people what the conditions are like on our campuses, what the conditions are like for workers, and using media, social media, and, you know, media in general, marketing, to get people on our side, so that it's not just us, you know, screaming into the abyss of Sacramento, which sometimes it feels that way.
Thank you for that. So telling our stories, building public support, using media, social media. Catherine, any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah. No, I think that they covered, I mean, and this is something that CSU Jim said that we've been trying to push forward. When we were starting out as a young union, the legislature didn't know who we were. One of the things we talked about was transparency, and how they need to make the CSU and hold them accountable and use the word transparency truly what it means. And it's because, like we said, they have these budget line items, and then the CSU says, yes, we'll do this, but then they get the money, and you're like, well, what happened to the money? I mean, so we end up going back to, like, for example, ethnic studies. It was approved by the legislature. The CSU needs to have this. And then it's like, well, we don't have the money for it, so we're not starting it. So then we have to get the legislature back involved, because it's like, what are you doing with the money? You know, this was approved. It should have been part of your budget plan, you know. And so it's one of those things where we need to also make sure the legislature stays involved. The community definitely is something Dr. Carlos mentioned that we need to do. Educate our members around us, our community around us, because they actually don't know what's going on at the system.
Right.
They just see when there's a dramatics, fireworks, things like that. But they need to know every day, because we're essentially a big employer in the cities we're in. And they should know what that big employer is doing at to the faculty, staff, and students at the campus level.
Thank you. I am going to get to our questions. A few of them we have addressed. And if you don't have the answer to the question in this question, I will ask our question of Paul Blanc to get back to us. The question is the yeshiva decision still in effect for faculty? It explains university can decline to allow if it chooses. Do you all know what that means? Oh, okay, great. But first of all, for those of us who don't know, please tell us what it means and answer the question. Jim, I see you shaking your head, so
Well,
I'm going to go to
I was just
you.
gonna dodge the question by saying that it's a decision of the National Labor Relations Board, which covers private sector faculty. And Dr.
Mhm.
Carlos and the other CFA members are public sector, so they're covered by California state law. So that decision wouldn't necessarily be imposed on them. So they're covered by the Higher Ed Employee-Employer Relations Act, which sets their collective bargaining rights, and same with ours.
Oh, thank you. Did anyone want to add anything to that?
I'll just sort of chime in. One of the things that's changed recently, not the Shiva, but the I'm a labor scholar, I should know this. The decision that basically allowed why am I forgetting the name? That allowed folks to opt out. So like, you know, our members are getting sort of opt out.
Right to
Like,
work.
thank you, right to work. I forget the
Right.
name.
Sorry, right to work.
Janet's decision. Janet's, sorry. This is morning time and end of the semester brain. So the Janus decision is sort of you know, like creating sort of more difficult you know, sort of like paths for us to sort of organize, but in some ways actually helping us because faculty are getting mad like that they're getting these things, and so that it's actually like, you know, people have reached out and say, hey, how can we get more involved in the union, because they're sending this, you know, terrible stuff trying to like get rid of our union. And so you know, whatever problems we have within the union in terms of how democratic it is or how it is not, you know, there's new terrain that's always sort of being laid out in terms of trying to make it harder for unions across the country. We're lucky that in California we still get to benefit from being in unions and not being a right to work state. But yeah, that's not the Shiva decision, but that particular decision we're seeing kind of slowly, like and it's well funded, and it's super well funded. And so we're, you know, fighting on that front, but then we're also fighting on this other front, trying to like grow our unions and also build solidarity. So, you know, it's a struggle.
Thank you. Catherine, did you want to add anything?
No, that, yeah, it's Jim said it, and then it's true. We, you know, Freedom Foundation is real, and they're backed by billionaires. So it's a struggle.
Thank you. We have a question here, and it is there a citizen science movement to both train people in social science and using creative communication streams like the aforementioned social media, documentaries, YouTube channels, etc.?
Not that I can necessarily put my hand. There's people doing it, you know, people, and the thing is, it becomes so a lot of nonprofits, you know, social justice movement type folks, you know, are doing their best with it. But it's sort of you know, it's like, I don't know if y'all remember when PDFs were kind of recent, you know, like older people needed younger people to sort of show them how to, you know, download a PDF, that kind of thing. It's similar. Young people are really good at it. They're really good at, and they just do it sort of instinctively because they grew up with it. And so so part of it is us, you know, like, you know, like I'll include myself as an older person, like how do we learn in like you know, and this gets, I think, to sort of Catherine's point where, you know, how the university treats us, very patronizing, is we need to not be like that. You know, we need to have young mentors. This is generally like I promote this anywhere I go. If you have, you know, everybody knows that you have older mentors, but if you don't have a young mentor, go get one, because they're going to
Yeah,
teach you a lot of things about how
beautiful.
the world is
Yeah.
functioning right now in this moment, how people are using communications in different ways that can be used by us to get our message out. And so, you know, those of us who are learning are trying to incorporate some of that stuff in our classes, and it's sort of a, you know, dialogical process where we're learning. So like on our campus, I'm the one that does our social media, and like during our strike, people, and like it's like once you know how to do it, it's technical. There's nothing flashy necessarily about it. It's you just jumping on, hitting play, and then recording a message, and then people like, oh, that, you know, that's a good point, or you know, but I wish we had resources or dedicated resources to doing that more. Like sometimes I had to get on our statewide CFA like social media and say, hey, like you should be posting all these other things. I did want to come back really quick to an important point I want to highlight that Catherine was making. Is really like open book management. right? We should sort of
Mhm.
just start expecting that from our own universities. Like, show us the budget. Like, all right, don't hide it from us. Like, this is a public institution. It should be, and we should have those conversations more. At the, like, I don't want to talk about higher ranks or lower ranks, but at the lower ranks, our members
Right.
should know what the budget looks like. We should have regular conversations about the budget. And even in our own institution, in terms of how much money we have, on our chapter funds. And maybe we should have a conversation, start getting together with the other unions on our campus and start developing a people's university budget. Local cities are starting to develop people's budgets where they're fighting for a more democratic process for budget making and
Right.
budget priorities. And then to get back to the other point is the shared governance. We really have to, like, hold them accountable. They love to talk about shared governance and how but when it comes to making, like, money decisions, like, we're always kept out of the loop on that. And part of that, all of that goes to democratizing the CSU. My dream would be that the trustees is actually made up of the people and the stakeholders that make up the CSU, which means faculty, staff, maintenance, janitorial workers, students, obviously. And that would, to me, make the trustees an actual democratic body that represents the people who are paying the bills, honestly, rather than the people that are benefiting from our student loans, or benefiting from, whatever our investments are in.
Thank you. And there's a quick question for you, Catherine. A reminder of what is the name of that organization? Freedom something. I'm sure it's something wonderful like Freedom and Ice Cream, because it's always something like that. But they're the ALEC of higher education, I guess.
Freedom Foundation.
Yes.
And
okay.
your members will receive things not necessarily with that name prominent. They do mass mailings. They've gotten a hold of our work email addresses, so school email addresses, through the Freedom of Information Act, and you'll get it, and it's called Opt Out Today, is the name that they come under. But it's the Freedom Foundation, who is funded by, like, the Koch brothers, who billionaires are funding, sending out messaging. Hey, you could save like $800, or here's a check. They do fake checks, $800 check. And then they say, it's not, not cashable, whatever, but this is how much you could save if you opt out of the union, and you still get the same rights if you weren't in the union, which is misleading and everything. But that's part of, that group is, their goal is to dismantle unions.
Yeah, and they're connected to the Heritage Foundation. It's like she said, the Koch brothers, and they play shell games with their corporations and their foundations, and so it's like this whole industrial complex of, like, anti-worker, pro-business folks. And I got one for Christmas that had, like, a little happy Christmas family, racially didn't look like me. And it was like, here's another present. You can get more money if you opt out. And then I think the line is that, but the union still has to represent you, which technically we do, because we represent the whole sector. Yeah, it's getting dodgy.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, also full disclosure, I think we've also been union siblings, because I was a lecturer at San Francisco State at one point. So yes. A last call for questions. We are wrapping up now, and what I'm going to ask our panelists, again, I'm going to go around. Any action items for those of us listening? What do we need to be doing if we're concerned about working conditions, health and safety among workers in higher education? And I really appreciate that conversation about the perception of unions and the perception of who's in a union, and we're professors, we don't need a union. But any action items for those of us listening in terms of workers' voices, working conditions, and strategizing and going forward for improving working conditions in higher education?
Well, one easy one that we always talk about at CSUEU is that CSU should be covered by state labor standards. And there's a whole building of lawyers at UC and CSU that believe that's not true. And that's why the student assistants have no sick leave. That's why they don't have wage and hour protections. There's some things that are harming our career staff where they're saying that they're not covered by state labor protections. I think that's sort of the easiest one for a person who's not directly working at CSU or UC to understand, is that these huge, huge university systems carve themselves out of state law unless the statute specifically names them as covered by the statute. They'll try to develop a carve-out argument, and UC is the master of it, and CSU is the apprentice, but they're both doing the same thing. So,
Wow, thank you so much for that, Jim. Catherine, your thoughts?
Yes. We need to make sure we pay attention to the bills that the UC and the CSU's put forward, because what Jim said, that's exactly what's happened. They've been able to carve out protections away from us, because they'll specifically say this does not apply to the UC, or this does not apply to the CSU, even though it should apply, because it's a labor condition, it's a working condition, it affects all of us. And so you really do need to pay attention to the bills that go forward. And also to, there's a bill from the UC about allowing, our immigrant workers who are not here technically legally to work at the CSU, the students. And we're supporting that bill. CFA is supporting it as well. But the scare tactic came from the regents. So we need to be careful of our regents. Our board of trustees is what they're called on the CSU side, on the messaging they put out, because they were like, oh, we're not going to pass this because the federal government won't recognize them and taxes can't get paid out. You guys have great legal teams. We have great legal faculty and professors. And we have to help change narratives when the system puts out a false narrative. And so we're helping to push that no, they get an I-10, and so they can have taxes paid out so you can hire them to do the job. So just when we see these things that the CSU or UC is putting out there, we need to do our due diligence and make sure it's not something that at the end is going to end up harming all of us.
I have a question for you, and if you don't know, that's fine. I'm going to ask somebody to dig it up. Do you know what that bill number is?
Let me grab yes, let me grab it from the email from Kent Wong.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't know if you have
thought
it.
you might.
I can
Yeah,
pull it
I
up
don't
while
know
you're
if you-
talking.
Yeah, I was like,
Meantime, also,
I don't
question
Jim
is
have
that
it for
I just-
quicker.
Yeah, while you're looking for it, like I love that they always do that. They always do the, oh no, we can't do anything. We're defenseless victim. But like when it comes to like, advancing something that's gonna like, hurt faculty but benefit their pockets, they have an army of lawyers who will go to bat for like the tiniest minutia. But when it's actually like helping people, like, oh no, they play the like victim role, and they have armies of lawyers. That's what they're spending the money on. They can totally, and they have been able to totally, like go up against the state. They can. And the fact that they choose not to is just, again, a priority issue.
So the bill is
And the other, yeah, go ahead.
AB
Thank you.
2586.
Okay,
So
it's
Assembly Bill
AB 2586.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Carlos, action items for our attendees today.
So action items is a couple of things have happened. The one, just want to highlight that Gen Z and Gen Y are the most pro-union generations that we've seen in a really long time. Let's take advantage of that. Let's connect with them. Let's help them help us. Figure out how to spread labor messages, working class messages, these narratives. They're doing an amazing job. Also AB 800 passed, which now requires high
Yes.
school students to learn their labor rights, workers' rights. So action items is get involved in that, figure out who's doing that, get connected so that they have local examples of labor struggles, labor issues, workers' rights. So if you're chiming in from California, this is basically a bill that passed and that requires workers' rights education in high school. And which is, so they're doing it in a 1 week sort of session. So get connected to that. Action items for us is, let's continue to have these conversations about the People's University budget. Let's actually start developing that. I think that's important for us to start visioning not just what we're against, but like, what is the world we want to live in look like? Because I think that actually helps sort of move our message, because it becomes, as someone who's been involved in social justice movements, it's hard to always just be against stuff. It's like you're banging your head on the wall continuously. And sometimes you want to be like, okay, what are we trying to work towards? What's the light at the end of the tunnel look like? Even if, we're always still chasing it. It's still nice to look at it.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We are right at 12:15, and we are going to lunch inspired and full of knowledge and full of wisdom. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this afternoon and for this panel. And I do want to thank Raphael, who is not here because he is organizing to make sure that workers in higher education are safe and are able to express their First Amendment rights and be safe at work. Thank you so much. We deeply appreciate your being here today.
Thanks, Monique. Thanks, Ed, for
Thank
inviting
you.
me.
Thank you all. It was just an absolutely amazing discussion. And we now have a 45-minute break for lunch. If you need some inspiration, we have a background music of songs about work and workers to play during the break. And it will resume at 1 o'clock with a focus on the healthcare workforce, another of the sectors where there's a tremendous amount of ferment and needs to be a tremendous amount of ferment. So with that, we're not stealing any time. It's lunch.